On this week's episode, we're doing something very different. I've never done this before, but I have explored a lot of different aspects of the Friday the 13th film franchise, but there are quite a bit of other forms of media in which it shows up in. I figured it'd be about time to check out one of those with the Friday the 13th comic book series. Now, in the four-color world, it's had a pretty interesting history, and I figured it's time to check it out and see if it actually ties in to the film series. So even though the Friday film series began in 1980, Jason actually managed to avoid showing up in comic book form for a really long time. I guess you could say that his first appearance was in 1988 in Blackthorn Comics' adaptation of the movie Waxwork. In a deviation from the actual film, that comic version depicts Jason as one of the wax figures in the film that comes to life and kills people. He's even identified as Jason, but looks different since it seems like he has hair here. This is not official though, and it's kind of more of a joke, but still exists as one of the first times that he's been in comic form, outside of something like a parody book such as Mad or something. There was, however, another, earlier unofficial appearance in Samurai Funnies number 2, although it is also unlicensed and not an actual debut. His first officially recognized comic book appearance, though, was, in a very peculiar way, with Satan 6 number 4, released in 1993, 13 years after his first appearance as a boy in the first film. Satan 6 was an odd series from Topps Comics, which used a bunch of random Jack Kirby concepts and just kind of threw them together in something called the Secret City Saga. It was written by Tony Isabella with cartoony art by John Cleary, and Jason is called upon to kill the Six. Since this was around the time of Jason Goes to Hell, that's the version that we get, with the mask embedded in his face, although he's wearing a little different outfit than he would in that movie. And he seems to say, a lot. He's on about 3 pages trying to kill the main characters and then just kind of teleports away, although when asked where he was sent, there's a meta joke about not using the comic for a plug, and that's it. That's his whole appearance in what was his comic book debut. Around the same time, Topps released their adaptation of the film Jason Goes to Hell, and was written by Andy Mangels. It mainly tells the same story as the film with a few differences, like apparently they had a news crew there when they killed Jason in the beginning, which seems like an odd thing to have at a covert sting operation. They also show you exactly why Duke was in the cell in the movie, as he was found trying to steal Diana's body from the morgue, and when the evil passes into Robert, it kind of looks like, he's pooping from his mouth into Robert's mouth, sorta. And get this, I know that every time this movie comes up, I talk about how my favorite part is Steven's little handcuff jump, and that's in the comic. They did not leave that awesomeness out. For the most part, though, it's pretty much just an adaptation of the film, so if you hate that movie, this isn't going to win you over, especially with the basic art stylings going on here. Topps kept it going, and in the October of 1995, released an original series with Jason in it, but this time brought in some help. And about a decade before getting Freddy vs. Jason, we get Jason vs. Leatherface. Written by horror novelist Nancy A. Collins and featuring covers by Simon Bisley, it starts off with Jason chained up in the bottom of the lake, so it's most likely sometime in the gap between part 6 and 7, although there's a bit of artistic license taken with just how many chains are wrapped around the big guy. So, a real estate developer dredges the lake and frees Jason, who sorta looks like his part 9 version with the mask sunken into his face, and he ends up on a train and is taken to Sawyerville, and comes face to face with Leatherface, and they duke it out, but then oddly make peace. There's another character who calls himself the Hitchhiker, but I'm assuming he's not the same as from the first film, since that would be a nightmare in terms of the time frame. But Cook is here too, although he looks like a different character as well, so it's either its own continuity or just more of Bubba's weird extended family. It's really odd seeing Jason being, cordial, and we learn that he can spell his name. He has some flashbacks showing us his father being abusive, and here's the weird part. I say that, but this entire series is the weird part. But Jason's dad is killed by Jason's mother, who he calls Doris. Now, this could be a simple mistake, but it could also be a nickname, like it's her middle name or something, and that's what he calls her. I mean, either way, it's a pretty weird mistake. The series does end with a knockdown, drag-out fight between the two titans, and Jason is seemingly killed, a little too easily, and dumped in a lake. And he wakes up and heads back home. Because of this ending, it's pretty clear that the book is not in continuity, as he is still in that lake at the beginning of part 7, and it doesn't seem like there's a way to get him back there from here, so this is more like a what if, branching off from the ending of part 6. So at this point, Topps Comics let the license lapse, and Jason vanished from the comic shelves for a solid 10 years. Keep in mind that the character was mostly absent from the screen for this period as well, but in 2005, he finally returned to the racks with Avatar Press taking on the franchise. They kicked it off with April 2005's Friday the 13th special, which was written by Evil Ernie and Lady Death creator Brian Pulido, with art by Mike Wolfer, which features a crystal lake with new resorts being planned, and a Jason that looks very similar to his design from Freddy vs. Jason, so continuity-wise, it's possible that this takes place after that film. 2 months ago, this guy says the construction site was demolished, and the two teens said they saw monsters, cementing this as being in FVJ territory and taking place just a few months after it. And the special actually confirms and shows Jason rapid healing from damage a la Wolverine, and has enough strength to hit a man on the head and knock it down through his butt. They followed it up with Friday the 13th Bloodbath a little later that year with the same creative team, and seemingly picks up 6 months after the events of the special, with a new camp called Camp Tomorrow being opened up, which now places us 8 months after FVJ, and no one gives Pulido credit for writing great black characters like Dion here, who says Kim has junk in the trunk. He's known for his subtlety. They're at Crystal Lake and reference crazy events happening and a Jason legend, but after the recent events of FVJ and the previous issue in which a helicopter crashed in a lake, how are they still letting people open camps here? Well, it turns out that the whole thing was an elaborate ruse to draw Jason out by a corporation, and he's captured, but gets free, causing chaos and carnage, and ends with him frozen in liquid nitrogen, but thawing out and moving on. At the same time, Avatar also put out Jason X, a single-issue special continuing from the ending of the movie of the same name. We're still in 2455, and we're thrown a big curveball here as we find out that that wasn't actually Earth 2 at the ending of that film, and was Earth 1. Kay here manipulated the Grendel into turning around because she's the last person left on Earth and wants to use Jason to find a way to restore her dying love, using robots to distract and confuse Uber, which is what those people were at the ending of Jason X, the film. She launches him back into space, but his evil takes the guy over and kills Kay, and Jason ends up back in space, and shortly after releases a follow-up with Jason vs. Jason X, a 2-issue series with Mike Wolfer picking up the writing duties as well as the artwork, and a group finds a piece of the Grendel looking for salvage, and somehow, remember when Jason had half of his head blown off in Jason X? Well, I guess that portion of his head is restored by the nanobots. So now, Freddy vs. Jason era looking Jason is here, and he ends up on the same ship that the Uber Jason is on, and they go toe to toe and have a pretty much issue-long fight in which UJ wins by cutting off Classic J's head and then tears it open, pulling out the brain and puts it into his own. He ends up back on Earth, or an Earth-like planet, and just goes back to Crystal Lake, I suppose. The Avatar era ended with 2006 Friday the 13th Fear Book, another one-shot picking up from Bloodbath, with Wolfer again writing, and it picks up where that one left off, with the final girl Violet ending up a captive of the corporation trying to trap Jason, who shows up and just kills everyone there, including Violet, and that was it. That's where their Jason ends. He's post Freddy vs. Jason and pre-Jason X, ready to be taken into custody to set up that film. So at this point, the license changed hands, and just 1 year later, Wildstorm, a division of DC Comics, picked it up and started fresh with a 6-issue limited series from 2006 to 2007 that sets up a familiar scenario. A bunch of kids are headed to Crystal Lake for a new camp opening. The boss talks about it, mentioning Jason drowning as a kid and Pamela killing people later on, but doesn't mention anything after that. So we may be looking at some sort of continuity reboot or retcon here, and they mention the internet, so we're not set in the past. And then there's a history lesson that changes things quite a bit. They say that Jason drowned in 57 and there was 2 murders in 58, which was the intro to Friday Part 1, but then says a few years later, Steve Christie tried to reopen it and was killed. And then goes on to say that they tried again in 62, so it looks like they're retconning the first film to take place back in the early 60s, most likely to account for Jason's rapid aging, I guess solving the issue of what he was doing all those years from the movies. In the 3rd issue, this guy says that every few years someone picks up Jason's MO and kills some people, and they say that he has a death certificate from when he drowned, so it's likely that in this continuity that the final chapter didn't happen, since they don't talk about it like there's any record of him appearing as an adult, although they also call his hockey mask infamous, so it's clear that his exploits are kind of known, so it's pretty unclear here what's in canon and what isn't. There's some interesting stuff with the lake being haunted by dead children and a native curse on the land that found a living vessel in Jason, but it's ultimately just a Friday the 13th story, and a kinda overlong and typical one at that, with more grating characters than normal. It was 6 issues and ends with everyone dead and Jason headed back into the lake. This run was written by one of the frontrunners of the whole original Marvel Knights run, Jimmy Palmiotti, along with Justin Gray, and had art by Adam Archer. Their next entry was a 2-issue limited series entitled Friday the 13th, Pamela's Tale, which went into the backstory of the infamous Mrs. V. It came out in September and October of 2007 and was written by Mark Andreyko with art by Sean Mall. The story starts at the beginning of the first film, detailing Annie's visit to town, and gives a date of Friday, June 13th, 1980, which contradicts my timeline of the series and defies that tombstone that we see in the 4th film. It's a direct adaptation of the first couple minutes of the film until she gets in that Jeep and we finally see the side of the story, including Pamela herself. She tells her backstory, which starts in 1947 and her marriage to abusive Elias, that she murders before Jason was even born. It's insinuated the cursed nature of the lake affected his birth, and we see in 1957 that the little dude is already up to no good, and his subsequent lake accident. It shows the opening scene of the first film from 1958 and the first killings at the camp, and ends at the ending of the first film, right before her battle with Alice. Wildstorm continued its take with another 2-issue miniseries entitled Friday the 13th, How I Spent My Summer Vacation, which came out in late 2007, immediately after Pamela's Tale in November and December. Written by Jason Aaron, who would very shortly go on to superstardom, with Adam Archer returning for art duties. This one starts off saying 50 years ago, showing right before Jason drowned, and since they had confirmed Jason died in 1957, that places the main story in 2007, which, compared to the main franchise timeline, would place this after Freddy vs. Jason, but before being captured for Jason X, although it's more likely, similar to the earlier limited run, that this is its own continuity. In this one, Jason encounters a young camper who suffers from facial deformities, and that apparently reminds the big guy of himself, so instead of just murdering him, he takes him along with him. The kid ends up sort of enjoying being with him and envies his ability to stand up for himself, and they face off against some soldiers and a crazy sheriff. They have a final face-off on a cliffside with Jason and the sheriff tumbling off and the kid being rescued, and Jason going to visit Mommy's grave. Now, so far, almost all the series haven't been connected to really any of the movies. Most of them are just Jason as a basic lore outside of any specific time frame. The only exceptions being him starting out chained up in the lake in the Jason X comics, but in early 2008 we get one that's directly connected. You see, after the success of Friday vs. Jason, they wanted to move forward with a sequel, and the consensus became that the next logical step would be to open up the universe further by putting the two up against Evil Dead's Ash. That movie, however, never happened, but there was a treatment written by Jeff Katz, That's about 18 pages long and lays out the entire storyline that would have been the film. Wildstorm decided to go ahead and adapt that treatment into comic book form since they already had the rights to do Friday and Nightmare comics, and teamed up with Dynamite Entertainment, who had the rights to Ash, to put out a 6-issue series called simply Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. It ran from January of 2008 to May of 2008 and was scripted by James Kuhark from Katz's Treatment with art by Jason Craig. It starts with a caption saying it's 5 years after the event of Freddy vs. Jason, which would place it in real-time 2008 since that movie is in late 2003, and they're in Crystal Lake. And they're once again going back to the name Forest Green and building a brand new S-Mart. It brings back Laurie and Will from Freddy vs. Jason, and they're promptly killed, and Jason keeps Freddy's head by his mom, and Fred's still in his subconscious, banging his mom. They link it to Jason Goes to Hell by explaining that the Necronomicon is there, like it was in that movie, and Jason has to go get it, and thankfully Ash is here, sent to the Crystal Lake S-Mart to help it out. And he gets the book first, and there's a wild in-store slaughter, which would have been fun to see in live action, and Freddy is restored through the use of the book. They managed to rip off Watchmen with the whole "you can't stop me, I've already done it" bit, and they confirmed the theory that Pamela used the Necronomicon to restore Jason from the dead after drowning, claiming that he is a deadite of sorts. They have a 3-way face-off with everyone trying to kill each other, and Jason gets a shotgun blast to the face, removing his mask and revealing his face, and he gets an arm chopped off, taking a tip from Ash and popping a machete on there. The final fight has Freddy elevated to godlike powers, but they use the book to open a portal and send the evil back, and Jason gets trapped beneath an icy lake. It's a fun read, but it's pretty interesting to watch the artwork decline in quality with each passing issue, assumingly due to deadline rushes. At the same time, from March to April of 2008, there was also a 2-issue limited series, still from Wildstorm, called Friday the 13th Badland. This one was written by Ron Mars with artwork by Mike Huddleston, and the 2 stories from 2 separate time periods. One takes place in what the promotional info says is 1750, with the other taking place in modern times. We get the story of a group of trappers taking refuge in the cold winter and taking advantage of and then killing a native woman as her husband then seeks to take revenge. Mixed with that, the standard tales of a couple of teens up at the lake in a cabin while a familiar face or hockey mask lurks outside. The usual killing happens, but the most interesting aspect here is the establishment of Crystal Lake as a cursed land, a place where bad things always happen, giving a supernatural element to the surrounding area, and some beginning to the backstory of the ghost children shown in the earlier series. Its place within the series is pretty wide open. It's definitely at a post-zombie Jason point, and is most likely just after the How I Spent My Summer Vacation storyline. Just a couple of months later, in June of 2008, they did a one-shot called Friday the 13th Abuser and the Abused, written by Joshua Hale Fialkov, with art by Andy B., and it's the story of Maggie here, who's abused and kills her parents, and then the boyfriend that beats her. But then Jason shows up, and they have an extended chase scene in which she reveals she killed them to emulate him and figures that he'd spare her, but he does not. It's pretty quick and simple, and again, it's fairly nebulous with the time frame and could take place at any time, but it makes sense to have it take place right after the last issues. Wildstorm stopped producing regular Friday content at that point, but they didn't return to the franchise until August of 2009, when they debuted a sequel to a sequel with Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, The Nightmare Warriors, another 6-issue limited series, once again setting the 3 horror titans against each other. The creative team of Katz, Kuhark, and Craig return and picks up right where the last series left off, only 24 hours later, so we're still in 2008, and we're back in the main film continuity. Jason is still in a lake, but some shady Black Ops group retrieves the book, but the Big J wakes up and starts doing what he'd be doing. His mask is still there, now blown in half, and he's looking a bit worse for wear, and we're now told that it's July 2nd, and it is 6 months after the last series. So, that means that this is either July of 2008, and the first series took place in January of 2008, but it could be 2009 as well. Maggie Burroughs shows up, last seen in Freddy's Dead, and then we also have Alice and Jacob from The Dream Child appear. The government brings Freddy out of the book, back in human form, and Maggie's sleeping with Neil Gordon from the Dream Warriors, and for some reason they've teamed up with Rennie and Tina. Rennie's the psychic girl from Friday the 13th Part 8, with Tina being the telekinetic from Part 7. Although oddly, they seem not much older than they did in their film appearances, although they'd be at least in their mid-30s by this point. I mean, Neil would have to be in his early 50s at the youngest at this point. To complicate the time frame, Stephen Freeman is there with Stephanie, both last seen in Jason Goes to Hell, and she's now a young girl, and it's mentioned that she encountered Jason as an infant. With Jason Goes to Hell not taking place too long before Freddy vs. Jason, and there being a 5-year gap between that movie and the comic series, she should still be a little kid, which tells me they're placing Part 9 earlier in the time frame than I would have calculated. Turns out they've collected all of those that survived Freddy and Jason in the past to bring them together to destroy them once and for all. But the big fella shows up and kills Steven right away. Luckily, Tommy freaking Jarvis is here as well, and Jacob is also quite a bit older, but with him being born in '89 in universe, he'd be just under 20 here, and he looks about it, so they're right there. Dream Freddy encounters Jason again and talks about their fight last year, but Ash says it's 6 months after the first series in July, which doesn't make sense. It's not a full year, and it's in the same calendar year, so saying last year is odd, unless Ash was just approximating the 6-month thing and the first series was late '08, like December, and this is July of '09, a different year, and still around 6 months or so. Fred uses his book enhancement to restore Jason's humanity, while his human form gets creepy. And here's the worst part. Maggie is evil and has been helping Freddy all along, and we get this lovely panel right here, which I never needed to see. Thank you. She kills Rennie, and they kick off a big war with long-haired pretty boy Jason leading an army of darkness. There's a massacre on the Senate floor, but then Freddy invades the White House, and W is still the president still, so unless this universe had a different election cycle, that makes this '08 then. So this is July '08, and the first series was earlier in '08, and Freddy just has a weird concept of what last year means. There's helicopters on the White House lawn, God Freddy, basically a laundry list of stuff that they wouldn't have done in a movie version due to budget, and then Maggie gets smushed under a tank. Alice gets gloved, but she passes the Dream Master power onto Jacob, who brings on the spirit of the Dream Warriors. And Amanda Kruger and Kincaid is in here, Taryn, the Wizard Master, and Jason and Tommy face off. The mask comes off, and Jason talks, kinda? But Stephanie, his niece, stabs him before Tommy cuts off his head. Then Nancy appears to Neil, and they use the book to open a portal again to suck Freddy in, and the Dream Demons get mad, so they strip Freddy of his powers and Ash shoots him dead. Weirdly, Tina does nothing in the final battle after crushing Maggie with a tank. Big final battle, and the girl with massive telekinesis is just kinda sidebar. At the end of the book though, Jason's body is missing, making it possible for this to still be in continuity with Jason X if he were captured very shortly after this. Strangely, there's an epilogue in which one of the FBI agents gets shot through a portal and ends up in 1964 and ends up signing Freddy's warrant, which is the reason he was let off on a technicality, so I guess time is tampered with here and Fred would go to jail now? I guess we'll never know since this story was not continued. In fact, that would remain the last we'd see of the character in 4-color form, now going on 13 years with no Jason comic books. Out of all the books, it would seem like each company sets its own continuity with few ties to the existing film universe, but they could be interpreted as taking place between the lines of the movies. So there you have it, a whole bunch of comic books that don't really follow a timeline. Some of these were not that great. There was a couple of gems in here of kind of fun reading, but for the most part, they're pretty not essential. The most essential ones are the Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash ones. They're a fun time. It's pretty interesting to think of what could have been with those movies. The artwork is, depending upon the issue, either great or very, very spotty. So know that when you're going in. It's a little iffy. But yeah, These were a fun read. There was some good stuff in here, but there were some definite clunkers as well. If you've ever checked these out, or if you like the Friday comics, or if this interested you, please let me know down below in that comments there, and click like on the video if you enjoyed it. Also, hit subscribe. We'll probably be doing some of these other comic book retrospectives for the other series. I know that there's some good Hellraiser books out there, and there was some cool Nightmare comics, so we'll be checking those out as well in the future. So let me know what you want me to check out on this particular focus for it and see. But yeah, also please check out the Patreon page. These guys are my patrons, and they help keep this channel going, and you could do that as well too by going to patreon.com/movietimelines and help supporting the channel, or you could just keep on watching the videos, and I'll see you very shortly for another great one. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.